Hi, Raven. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hello, nice to see you, Raven.
Nice to see you too.
Avery, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I just want to confirm one more time when we get to Q&A, I'll be taking those from the chat.
If it's preferable to you, I can. I was going to relay them to you from the chat.
That's wonderful.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
So just to let everybody know, we will be beginning in probably 2 minutes. And thank you all again for being here. It is so lovely to see all of your faces. And thank you again to the interpreters for taking the time to be here today. Thanks. All right, so we're going to begin. Thank you to everybody for being here with us today, those who are joining in from SwapCard, as well as anybody who is in the webinar with us. So today we are kicking off our NA activities, our National Accessibility Week activities for 2021. Dawn is the official creator of NA for Quebec. So we're all really, really grateful to have our amazing panelists here today. Our theme this year is art for accessible activism. And our panel today is on how art can create a more accessible form of protest beyond a march. So we have an incredible lineup of activists, artists, people with disabilities, women, queer people, gender nonconforming people here today. So thank you everybody again. And I will start by doing a land acknowledgement before I pass the mic over to our moderator, Tracy Tigwell. Great. So I will be saying the land acknowledgement in French, and then I will be following it in English. So for those having access to the French captioning, please wait because you won't receive this land acknowledgement until after it has gone through the English. So please do not worry. Avant de débuter cette importante conversation, nous souhaitons spécifier qu'elle aura lieu sur le territoire non cédé de plusieurs nations autochtones à travers l'île de la Tortue. Plus spécifiquement, du lieu d'où Dawn est située à Tiohtià:ke, aussi connu comme Montréal, situé sur le territoire non cédé des Kanien'kehá:ka. En tant que colons, nous reconnaissons qu'il n'est pas suffisant de simplement reconnaître la terre sur laquelle nous vivons et nous produisons nos événements. Il est également nécessaire de s'engager à apprendre comment prendre du recul, céder l'espace et centraliser les voix des individus autochtones les plus marginalisés qui sont trop souvent peu entendus. Ceci étant dit, une manière concrète d'aider et de soutenir les Autochtones à Tiohtià:ke et de soutenir les organisations qui travaillent d'auprès eux, comme le Native Women Shelter et Résilience Montréal. Nous allons copier les liens vers ces organisations dans le chat, mais nous vous encourageons également à regarder les liens et réfléchir à comment nous pouvons soutenir le travail en cours de ces par ces organisations. Nous encourageons également les individus qui se joignent à nous d'à travers le monde de faire le même et de voir quelles organisations autochtones vous pouvez soutenir dans vos propres communautés et villes. Now, I will give this again in English. Before diving into this very important conversation, we will start by saying that this conversation is happening on the unceded Indigenous lands of many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island, and more specifically from the site from which Dawn is situated, in Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal, on the unceded territories of the Kanien'kehá:ka. As settlers, we recognize that it's not sufficient to acknowledge the land we work and produce events on. We also need to do the work to do a better job of stepping back, ceding space, and centering the too often unheard voices of the most marginalized Indigenous folks. With that said, one concrete way in helping support Indigenous folks in Tiohtià:ke is to specifically support community organizations that work with Indigenous folks, like the Native Women Shelter and Resilience Montreal. We will be pasting the links to these organizations in the chat box, but we will also encourage folks to check out the links and see how they can support the ongoing works of these organizations. We also encourage folks who are joining from different parts of the world to do the same and see which local organizations they can support. So you will find the link in the chat. And now I have the great pleasure of passing the conversation over to Tracy Tigwell and our incredible panelists. So without further ado, I present you Tracy.
Thank you. I'm seeing a message from an interpreter. I wonder, Avery, if you could help with that. Just give me one moment and I'll paste it here.
Yes. Sorry. I am spotlighting the ASL interpreters and the LSQ interpreters and the speakers. So I am watching to make sure that the proper LSQ and ASL interpreters are pinned at all times. So when you switch out, I'll be watching to make sure that you are accurately spotlighted.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for helping us sort that detail out. And thank you, Avery, for the introduction. I am very honored to be here with this incredible panel of artists and practitioners to talk about rethinking protest beyond a march, art as accessible protest. My name is Tracy Tidgwell, and I'm here to welcome you, the audience, and to invite Arceli, Kamisa, and Raven into this conversation in relation to their own work as artists and activists and practitioners who bring grounding, who ground their work in their relationships to their own lives, to their community lives, and to social change. We're going to begin with a little review of today's format. We'll have some introductions. I'll introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll have a short go around where each panelist can add briefly to what I've said, and we'll each do a self-description of ourselves for people who aren't accessing this visually. And then we'll get into some conversation. We'll end with a short question and answer period from the audience. So if you have questions, you can save those and you can add them to the Q&A. I think folks will have access to the Q&A section inside the platform. And Avery will help us with that when we get there. So I'll start with myself. I'm a fat, disabled, queer artist working in performance and video, photography, and writing. I'm an activist. I currently work towards collective liberation with a group called Fat Rose. We're a cross-movement incubator that connects Fat experience to other liberation movements, and I also work with them and the Nobody is Disposable Coalition. I also work inside the university world with Bodies in Translation, Activist Art, Technology, and Access to Life. And that's a disability arts and culture project that cultivates generative partnerships between artists, activists, scholars, and communities. And that's at the Revision Center for Art and Social Justice at the University of Guelph. In all of the work I do, I really hold tight and expansively the ideas and the work of being in process, in connection, and in relationship to the past, the present, and the future through love and through queerness. I'm very honored to be here with this panel. It feels incredibly special to me, and I'm just really excited to introduce you to this amazing group of people. I'm going to start with Arceli. Arceli Dokumaja is Canada Research Chair in Critical Disability Studies and Media Technologies and the director of the forthcoming Access in the Making Lab at Concordia University. Arceli is an interdisciplinary scholar and creative practitioner. Her scholarly and creative work lies at the crossovers of disability studies, performance studies, media studies, and medical anthropology. In her research and research creation videos, Arceli explores how disabled people go about their everyday lives and come up with micro improvisations that she calls activist affordances. Hope we're going to hear about that today. Arceli is particularly interested in exploring how disability can be a critical method to rethink and practice media in new ways. Her research appears in Current Anthropology, the South Atlantic Quarterly, Disability Studies Quarterly, Performance Research, and in other journals and edited collections. Arceli is currently launching a 4-year interdisciplinary team called Mobilizing Disability Survival Skills for the Urgencies of the Anthropocene. Please join me in welcoming Arceli Dokumaja.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Would you like me to go ahead for the brief image description of myself?
I think that would work well, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tracy, for this wonderful introduction. Thank you to Dawn for organizing this panel. And it's such an honor to be in the same panel with Kamisa and Raven. I'm simply honored and really look forward to our conversation. just to give an image description of myself, I'm an olive-skinned woman in her 40s with dark short black hair and dark frame glasses. I'm wearing a light orange shirt. That was the closest to orange I could find in my cabinet today. Behind me is a library and some plants that are on my right-hand side that are still alive. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Arcelie. Next, I'm going to introduce Kamisa. Kamisa Makoita is an Afro-descendant artist and activist of Malayan origin. A native of Quebec, they grew up in Montreal. They hold a bachelor's degree in visual and media arts from the University of Quebec in Montreal. And by their institutional reviews, as much as through their pictorial work, they assert themselves in the act of repairing and empowering the communities they belong to. Their practice draws from the socio-political context, from Afrofeminisms, and from popular Western cultures. This intersubjective approach leads them to work in collaboration and to reflect on the social body as material, all from an Afro-queer perspective. Welcome, Kamisa.
Merci beaucoup, Tracy. Je suis vraiment contente d'être ici aujourd'hui avec vous tous. Je vais tout de suite y aller pour la description. Donc, j'ai la peau brune. J'ai un chandail argenté avec un débardeur beige, un collier de cori et j'ai des locks de couleur brune foncée. Et derrière moi, on peut voir une bibliothèque blanche, des coussins de couleur, et voilà.
Thank you, Kamisa. Welcome. And Raven Wings. Welcome. Raven Wings, aka the Black Widow of Burlesque, is a Tanzanian Bermudian Mohawk two-spirit empowerment movement storyteller of trans experience. An abolitionist and Black Renaissance artivist. Her work is rooted in Black liberation and Indigenous resurgence. She has a vision to create work, art, conversations that open minds, expand truths, and deepen intellectual commitments to lived experiences. Her purpose is to elevate the level of our collective global humanity. Raven is a co-founder of Ilnana Diversity, Diverse City Dance Company, the artistic director of Outrageous Victorious Africans Collective, a steering committee member of Black Lives Matter Toronto, and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Canada. Welcome, Raven.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raven Wings. I am Afro-Indigenous, so I'm dark-skinned. I have curly hair. I'm really excited to be here. I'm wearing kind of a caramel jacket. I'm sitting on my bed in my living room. So I'm really excited to be here in this conversation, talking about very, very important aspects of the vastness of activism, of progress, and connection. And all of these things are central to my work. I'm currently living here in Takaranto, the One Dish, One Spoon Treaty Wampum, underneath the protection of the Haudenosaunee people, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe people, the Métis, the Chippewa, and all of Inuit Nunavut. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Raven. Thank you, everyone. I realized I didn't describe myself, so I'll interject that here. I'm a fat, white, middle-aged, queer person, currently sitting in my kitchen. I'm wearing glasses and a mesh shirt with a button-up style collar. I think without further ado, I'll just launch into my introductory thoughts and invitations for conversation, and really looking forward to it. So just thinking about this last year of a resurgence of uprisings and protests that began in Canada and around the world that have recentered us towards the calls for liberation led by Black and Indigenous liberationists, but reaching far beyond identities and liberation movements to touch everyone. These calls for radical and political social change and to capitalist-driven ways of organizing and guiding us through life, and towards embracing other ways of organizing our social world, of being together, of taking care of ourselves and each other, and of being creative and imaginative in how we do that. So we know that protests often happen in the streets, and this is really important work. And at the same time, disabled, ill, and aging people, neurodiverse people, and others have always showed us how to rally and to fight, to resist, to interrupt in many other different kinds of ways. And never before this past year of the pandemic, that's been a time of social distancing, of isolation of many, and very different ways of being social together. So never before this year have we looked so directly to disabled artists and communities for leadership around how to be, to work, to protest, and to fight together. So I'm thinking about accessible protest and how it means that we recenter and listen to the most vulnerable amongst us in loving and generative ways. So in this sense, I'm thinking about accessibility and our various practices around accessibility as becoming art forms themselves. So in our first round of conversation, I hope that you could speak to how does accessibility as both protest and art form show up inside your practice? And I'll stop there. I don't know if one of you wants to jump in, or should I direct the question to someone?
I'm so sorry, but before we continue, I just needed to interject because we have received a comment that when Kamisa speaks, the interpreters are no longer interpreting because our LSQ interpreters actually interpret from ASL into LSQ as they are deaf interpreters. So Kamisa, if you would like to speak in French, please let me know, and I will do my best to restate what you have said so that the interpreters can show what you've said to our deaf audience members. But if you are comfortable speaking in English, let me know. But if it's I would want you to speak in the language that is preferable to you, and I will do my best to convey what has been said.
Yeah, it will be preferable for me to do the panel in French.
Okay, great. I am here to be your second voice.
Thanks, Avery. So I'll repeat the question. How does accessibility as both protest and art form show up in your practice?
I can jump in and begin. So I'm a dancer, dance artist, and producer here in the city of Toronto. And so all of my work centers accessibility, advocacy, and connection to that of the land and people. My work with Black Lives Matter Toronto specifically really centers disability and trans leadership. And so we don't see them as separate in terms of our activism. When we plan out our actions, which you mostly see as marches, it involves all those different pieces. And so we try to make it as accessible as possible for those who are showing up to the events. And we also have developed ways to stream our marches online and to connect to folks and have people engage in leadership in ways that doesn't have them in public or in the actual march if that's not safe for them to do. And so we're always thinking about it and always evolving. There isn't just one fix because our communities need different things at different times. But the practice of Indigenous people and abolitionists is to look at the most marginalized among us for our tools, for our understandings. And so in this time period of pandemic, we're looking at social bubbles, ways of taking care of each other, which comes from disabled communities, MAD communities. This is something that has been developed over a long period of time. And so what we're seeing is mainstream media and folks who are outside of those communities or realities paying attention to the work that was already happening, as opposed to it just being because of the uprisings of 2020. I think it's several hundreds of years of protest, protection, and activism.
I can jump in as well quickly if Kamisa, you want to go ahead? Okay. It was such a beautiful answer what Raymond has said. So I'm just also thinking about those thinking access really in broad terms as an intersectional issue, and also access as a site of possibility and as a site of intervention, rather than being an afterthought, a checklist, a code compliance, or something that people tend to see, the general public and certain institutions tend to see it as something constraining, like kind of as a liability issue. But what if we approach access, as many disabled artists and marginalized populations are also doing, as a site of possibility? What could it open up? And a good way to start that I see in my own practice, and as I learned from other disabled artists and activists and practitioners as well, is taking nothing for granted. And really take nothing for granted, do not presume anything, and always be ready to unlearn. Most of the stuff is really doing the heavy work of unlearning what we have been indoctrinated through all our lives, all the ableism that has gone thickly under our skins. And to shed that skin requires heavy work, and to be continuously self-reflecting, and then thinking access as a process of unlearning, as I said, that doesn't have an end. And we will never reach there. It's not like a final target thing. And along the way of this continuous trying and learning, we will obviously fail at certain points, and those failures and mistakes are really valuable opportunities to learn and to take accountability, to be really responsible for any harm or any failure that has been done, but not taking it as a drawback, but really a point to reflect upon and grow from that. This has been a general answer, but I'm hoping that we can continue the conversation altogether. I'm really curious about what you will be saying. Thank you.
Merci pour vos commentaires. Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec vous. Je pense que l'accessibilité est beaucoup reliée à l'empathie et au care qu'on va donner aux gens avec qui on collabore, par exemple. Puis j'ai souvent l'impression que l'accessibilité, c'est juste le début puis la base de tout, en fait. J'ai l'impression que sans accessibilité, il ne peut pas avoir une réelle réciprocité, un réel travail, une réelle mutualité entre les gens dans les collaborations, ou même avec le public. J'ai l'impression que comme personne neurodivergente, puis comme personne MAD, ça fait partie de mon travail d'essayer d'ouvrir le plus possible les possibilités d'accessibilité d'abord pour moi, pour que mon environnement de travail soit sécuritaire, mais aussi pour toute la communauté qui va graviter autour de moi. Voilà.
Merci, Kamisa.
So I will be able to speak on this as for what Camisa has just said. All right. So without accessibility, there cannot be reciprocity or mutuality or collaboration with the public. As a neurotypical person and as a MAD person, it's part of my work to open the possibilities of accessibility for me so my workspace is safer, but also for all the communities that surround me.
And just something that Kamisa said just before was how accessibility is heavily linked to empathy and to care, and that accessibility is the basis of everything.
Thank you, Karine. And also I wanted to say thank you so much to Karine from Dawn, who is helping me to do this interpretation on the fly. And I apologize again for this issue. That is all my fault.
Avery, thank you. Kamisa, thank you. I just to kind of bridge those two things, like Kamisa's, your comment about reciprocity, it is such a generative space of learning from each other, and that isn't necessarily like equal in the way that we think about like, you know, you give me something and I give you something of equal value. It is actually an exchange that is more based on relationship and time and energy and I'm trying not to use capitalist terms like investment, but the way that we relate to one another through time and space, through collaboration, through working together, and thinking about our failures as also generative sites. And I love the way that disability community has brought me into exploring these concepts of reciprocity and failure in ways that are never resolved, but always teaching. And so we are, you know, rubbing up against one another in ways where my needs are fictitious with yours and your needs are fictitious with somebody else's. And I think that actually is a space of a lot of visionary making. Like we can get to a lot of expansive places from there. Anyone want to add more to that one? Have more to say on that?
Justin, I agree. Raven speaking. I agree in terms of the reciprocity. I'm thinking about that when we talk about solidarity. There's a lot of conversation about allyship right now. And from my Indigenous elders, they speak of allyship as you being invited into a movement, into a space. It doesn't mean that you can't show up. I think that there's this this unfortunate habit of believing that empathy is all that is required for change. It's easier to cry than to get involved, and to understand how you could be perpetuating the systems that you are seeing play out in people's lives. And so it takes a sense of deep reflection, actually, deep self-reflection, and having the ecosystem around you hold you in care and accountability, so that you can be focused and have integrity in terms of reciprocity. As I mentioned earlier, I live in the one dish, one spoon, where that means that there's one bowl that all of us are eating it out of. And so we all have to put into the bowl, and we're not taking out more than we need, and we share what we have. It's allowing the land to be our teacher again. And for some of us, it hasn't changed. But to return back to these connections out of this state of progress as it relates to capitalism, but more so progress being how much deeper we're connected to each other, how much support people have in their lives. I think after 2021, when this pandemic has ended, hopefully, I just hope that we don't return to a time where we're ignoring each other, where we aren't seeing what is happening in real time all over the world, not just here in Canada, but everywhere. The plights of all people, disability communities, folks who are mad and disabled are being attacked all over the world from different bills that are being proposed. And so it is exhausting work, but it's necessary work for us to not only pay attention to, but to try and find solutions for. I believe, because I'm an example of my ancestors' dream of science fiction, right? I'm a living science fiction because my ancestors didn't see this when they were running away from slave quarters. They had to imagine beyond themselves. And so for us who are here now, who have so much more abundance than they did relatively, it's our job to dream even bigger and even further. So I do think that we can come to a place where everyone has what they need. Everyone is supported in all the ways that they need to, and we're working interdependently with each other to build those processes.
Yeah, thank you. Do either of you want to jump back in? I'll move on to our next prompt that actually does touch on how we are shaped by what's come before us, and also how that shapes who we are now and what we do. And I'll just preface that by saying that many of us make work that is political, and intentionally so. We make work with some kind of purpose. And I was, in reflecting, thinking about Vanessa Dion Fletcher's performance work. She has this piece, Finding Language, that looks at how systemic colonial oppression intersects with her relationship to language as a Lenape and Potawatomi neurodiverse learning disabled person. She performs this as a kind of a scavenger hunt in a site-specific space. She hunts through the space and explores the words that give the space shape and context. She finds words that exist inside the space. I see this piece as one example of what can happen when we allow art to lead us towards meaning, when we allow art to lead us towards meaning. Can you just speak about who you are, what shaped you, how your experience shapes your artistic or creative process, and how that leads you to making meaning? Kamisa, would you do us the honor to start?
Je pense que déjà le fait que je sois noire a beaucoup impacté sur mon travail, bien sûr, parce que c'est la partie la plus visible de mon identité. Mais après avoir eu certains diagnostics par rapport à ma neurodivergence il y a quelques années, je me suis rendu compte que c'était beaucoup plus central dans ma pratique que ce que j'aurais pu le croire. Je pense qu'il y a quelque chose de particulier avec la neurodivergence et les handicaps invisibles, dans le sens où c'est quelque chose qui est tout simplement comme ignoré puis mis de côté socialement. Et puis souvent, la société ou nos proches vont souvent s'en remettre à des potentielles intentions qui feraient qu'on n'est pas apte à faire certaines choses ou d'autres, ce qui peut être quand même assez difficile. J'ai développé l'habitude de me battre, d'être dans l'obligation de m'imposer pour être dans un espace. Puis clairement, ça a impacté sur les choix artistiques que je fais et pourquoi j'ai dû politiser mon travail. Je pense que si j'étais pas un négro et si je n'étais pas une personne neurodivergente, probablement que mon travail artistique serait essentiellement esthétique. J'aurais beaucoup aimé travailler sur la couleur ou bref, des problématiques purement esthétiques, en fait. Je pense qu'il y a une question de survie dans le fait de devenir activiste pour certains, certaines. En tout cas, pour moi, certainement, ça l'a été. Et puis, c'est ça, c'est devenu comme une responsabilité que je ne regrette absolument pas, mais je pense que c'est super important de préciser que c'est vraiment dans un contexte de survie que beaucoup d'entre nous font ce type de choix-là. J'espère que ça va aller pour l'interprétation. I hope it's going to be okay to like translate.
Yes, I wanted to let the panelists know that we have actually been able to make sure that the ASL interpreters are hearing the English translation by our amazing interpreter, Veronique. And so now there will be no issues and I will no longer have to speak. And you will be interpreted as you are properly speaking Kamisa. So thank you very much, everybody, for your patience.
Thank you, Avery, and the Dawn team for getting real innovative there. That was really great. Thank you.
It is not the Dawn team. I have to give all of the credit to Geneviève Boujol, who is a powerhouse of LSQ interpretation and is watching our panel today. So thank you, Geneviève Boujol.
Thank you, Geneviève. Raven or Arcely, do you want to jump in there?
Okay, sure. Raven speaking. As I said before, I'm a dancer, and a lot of how I understand the world is through movement, energy sharing. It's my love language, and it allows me to live my practices very embodied. And so, as I understand, art and activism aren't separate. They aren't separate things. They're connected. For me, in my work, like exclusively, because art is the practice of storytelling. And so there are some things that need to be danced. There's some things that need to be sung. There are some things that need to be spoken and written or just felt. And art gives us pathways to these particular things. And so, for example, when thinking about a march, as a dancer and a producer, I create shows. And so this is an opportunity for me to use my love language, something that brings me joy and safety, to benefit a larger movement, to choreograph the formation of the march. For example, the colors that we wear, the way that the chants are done. This is all, it's not performative activism, but it is using these specific tactics to get attention. I'm a burlesque performer as well. And so, as my friend Dainty Smith speaks about, it's a seduction, and all the seduction is getting someone's attention. And so you can do that with bright colors. You can do that with sounds. You can do that with the way that you paint or draw. And so it is for me, it's a vast understanding of how art and activism can shift and create more space for representation, and allow us to see each other in these really uniquely beautiful ways. And so that's how I have used it in my life, and continue to.
I will just connect to that, and this is Arcelia speaking, and apologies to the interpreters. The first time I spoke very fast, so I will try to slow my pace down. And so I was just hearing, I don't much understand French, but I was hearing Kamisa talking about invisible disabilities, I think. Okay, so that's how I also come from my own embodied experience into disability. As a person who is who has non-apparent disabilities, I live with chronic pain and chronic illness, and that does prevent me from going to the streets and protesting, going to the marches. I live with immense amount of joint pain. If I stand up more than 15 minutes, I will be in bed the next day. So these are not possible forms of protest for me to attend. And so for many other invisibly disabled people who for many reasons may not find the streets as their place for protest. But does the street have to be the only form of protest that I have been also like thinking with others? Just speaking of from the type of particular impairment I have, I have a chronic illness that affects my joints, and joints mean movement, as Raymond was saying. I was also thinking like, because of these constraints that I as a disabled person live with this chronic illness, then everyday life itself becomes a dance stage that you really have to be very inventive, very improvisatory and creative to make things work against all odds. So if certain way of moving doesn't work for you because it's painful, then you invent another way of doing it. So I'm interested in all these very micro, ephemeral, everyday choreographies, or really these dances that many disabled and otherwise marginalized people are doing just to survive the everyday. And I come to think of it as surviving the everyday becomes an art form, becomes a protest in itself, because sometimes just surviving the day against all the constraints and restrictions put on you through structural inequalities largely, then just that survival tactics and choreographies become an art form in and of itself that needs to be also communicated and learned from, and see how protest takes place in very tiny corners of our homes and everyday lives that nobody actually sees. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yeah, thinking about accessibility in a broad way that includes both the participation of people and the leadership of disabled, mad, ill, aging, neurodiverse people, and others, and also to think about accessibility as continually moving towards our collective liberation, accessibility as access to our wholeness, to our bodies, to ourselves, to our relationships, to our bodies and ourselves, to our communities and those relationships, to the land. I really like thinking about accessibility in these ways and how these things guide your work. I wonder if you want to speak, Arceli, a little bit about how this idea of, you've said it a little, but the idea of the affordances as experiential, experimental, as creative relationships with our environments. I think you've all been talking about that. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure, of course. I'm also happy to explore the connections of these affordances if anybody sees something. So the idea is when what I try to think of with activist affordances is really creating the affordances, the offerings of the environment that doesn't yet exist in any material form, as an object, as an artifact, as a technology, as an infrastructure that would make your life easier. You just come up with those absent and missing affordances through these very creative choreographies that, you know, either it's a particular way of, I don't know, holding a mug, or particular way of dressing, like opening light switches with your head from your wheelchair because you cannot stand up to that height. So it's continuously reinventing the environment that kind of has a very limited scope of bodies and mind inscribed into it, and creating this kind of otherwise world that was accessible, like almost, you know, open and welcoming, in and through these movements, in and through these inventive gestures that makes the world accessible, even if only for the moment, even if temporarily, even if between just as an interaction between a couple of bodies that will just disappear in that moment. So those very tiny places of solace, those places of refuge you can find in an otherwise unwelcoming world, that I come to think about as activist affordances, and the activism of which is not recognizable as such, not happening in the streets and marches. But I would like to hear others' thoughts.
Kamisa and Raven, can you think about the way that you engage in your community and artistic practices as in relationship to this idea of sort of experiential, embodied, creative relationships? You've been talking about it, but do you want to say anything more about that? And in relationship to our environments?
Je dirais que déjà d'exister, c'est pour moi une affirmation politique en soi, de se rendre visible. Pour parler juste de ma situation, déjà, j'ai toujours eu l'impression que les gens ne me voient pas comme une personne disabled. Ils ne me voient pas entièrement avec tout ce que ça peut impliquer. Donc, de me rendre visible, pour moi, c'est déjà comme c'est ça, un acte politique, un acte de manifestation, en quelque sorte. Puis, j'ai l'impression qu'il faut qu'on existe, en fait, tous ensemble. C'est ça qui peut nous donner une force, c'est ça qui peut nous permettre, justement, de bâtir des espaces sécuritaires. Puis j'ai l'impression que ça passe beaucoup par toutes mes activités en ligne, cette manière d'exister puis de connecter avec les autres. Parce que Internet, c'est un espace qui peut être super accessible parce qu'on n'a pas à sortir de chez nous puis d'affronter les espaces publics, les constructions sociales et toutes ces oppressions qui peuvent être confrontantes ou violentes.
Yeah, thank you for the question and everyone's offerings. For me, I teach dance classes, intensives, and we craft and create programming that is about connecting to our bodies in a way that is safe and gentle. This started um, out of a need for more space for our bodies to exist in in all the ways that they do. I'm part of a dance company, and we had a member who was a part of our company who has chronic pain. And so we had to navigate as a group how to come up with strategies to support them, and also create choreography that allowed them to meet it at whatever state their body was in. So whether that was in a chair, whether that was standing for a small moment of time, we just created all these different ways for us to be together, and it really um, pushed us to create a toolkit, a manual that we are developing right now, currently, um, uh, to take into school programs, dance programs, movement programs, all over the city and beyond, hopefully, that have people who are practitioners and have lived experiences of disability and navigating movement, um, to give best practices in their experience. Of course, this is not a fix all, but it will allow people a window into even having the conversations in their institutions in ways that are safer for our bodies to exist in. We live in a very ableist world, country, and mindsets. And so unfortunately, a lot of this work is undoing undoing what we have been inherited. Um, but I don't believe that just because we inherited something that we have to keep doing it. We have a choice in how we are in relationship to each other. Um, and so I'm choosing to walk gently on the land. You know, when you think about farming, when you think about being with water, ocean, when you think about, recently I saw a photo here in Takaranto on Toronto Island, which is unceded Indigenous territory. Um, People are so excited about being outside, right? The sun is shining, it's really beautiful. Um, Yet when they left, there was garbage all over the shore. And so that is not reciprocity. Like that in itself creates a problem, especially because there isn't a thought about who is going to clean that up, where all of that trash ends up going to, into the ocean, into the animals, into the ocean, back into our bodies. And so we are constantly in this cycle that is somewhat parasitic, right? It is um, unfortunately, we have leadership in our governments, policies, and laws that aren't actually about the safety and sovereignty of people. They're about the protection of property, of capital, of the bottom line. We saw it when this pandemic hit in 2020, when all of the funds were going towards airlines to bail out airlines, as opposed to people who have worked their whole lives to own their own homes. We saw in Montreal, we saw a gentleman arrested for creating tiny homes for the houseless in this period of time where they weren't able to social distance. And so when we have people who are actually creating programs, different ways of connecting with each other, we have that interrupted by our governments and our policies and our laws and Health Canada and all these things. And so the work it's all over the place. There's your self work, there's community work, and then there's going against the system that needs us to be in these positions for them to have what they have. It needs us to be poor. It needs us to fight within our own communities, so that we're not paying attention to where money is being put into and allocated into, which is why Black Lives Matter has been focusing on defunding. And that defunding campaign being about a reallocation of funds into all these programs that already exist. They already exist. They're just not given as much attention. They're not given the support. And it is always poor people coming up with the resources to support poor people. And then we have a cultural shift, like what happened in this pandemic of activists and these movements all around the world. And then institutions catch up. You know, they catch up with the language. They catch up with the stickers and the right things to say, so that it seems as though they are moving with the time. But the only thing that's actually shifted is their language. It isn't the action. It isn't actually our lives. A lot of us who were suffering before the pandemic are still suffering now, and even more so. But I feel like there are more conversations about mental health now. There are more conversations about disabled people, because more people are understanding the experience of isolation, the experience of lack of touch, the experience of not being able to move in the ways that you want to, which disabled people already know and already have experienced. And so this is what I meant by I hope that when we are able to be back in relationship to each other, back in schools and theaters and whatever, that we're still holding a disability politic that allows people to stay home when they need to stay home, that allows people to work from home. I remember a time where if you said, oh, my body is hurting, I can't come into work, they said, you have to find a way. Now they have found a way for all of us to be on Zooms and for things to be made more accessible in a particular way, because you have to have certain devices in order to engage in this kind of conversation in these kinds of ways, right? So it's not foolproof. But it has allowed a lot of us to build more comfort in being able to say, you know what, I won't do this anymore. I'm not coming into work. I'm going to do this for my safety, for my body. And the work still happens and still gets done. So I hope that is not only considered, but is part of how we're developing these jobs and these systems for each other. I rambled a bit, but that's my thoughts.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I want to bridge us towards a kind of concluding question before we move to Q&A that really fits nicely with what you shared, Raven, just around honoring the past, who and what has been here before us and who and what is here with us now, and how we do and why we do continue to hold space for accessibility and art and protest as sites of possibility and sites of liberation in the past, in the present, and the future.
Well, I will jump in. I follow a principle called Sankofa, which is an African proverb that means go back and fetch it. There are two symbols. One is an inverted heart, and one is a bird, its feet facing forward with its head looking backwards, which means that in order to move forward, in order to have progress, we do have to understand our histories. We do have to understand how we got here. That's why I think that history is so important, and it is why there's been such an attack on our histories as Indigenous people, as people of color, as women. There's been such an attack on our movements, on who led these movements, and the disappearing of sex worker activism and MAD and disabled leadership. These things have always been integral to our movements. They've always been there. They're seen as new, as niche, as in this moment, this right now, 2020 uprising. But these are old as colonization, because as long as colonization has happened, we've been resisting it in all the different ways, whether that was assimilating in order to survive, whether that was hiding, whether that was the loss of our languages. All these things are debilitating, and we don't always talk about how trauma and intergenerational trauma is a part of how we experience the world and how we understand ourselves. And so therefore it stops people from being able to speak up. And even when people speak up, it stops them from being able to be heard and protected. And so that's why I do what I do as part of Black Lives Matter. I'm a trans woman, and it is not safe for me in the world. It's just not. But I have a particular kind of privilege, right? I have a privilege to say that I'm tired in a way that my ancestors did not have. They couldn't say, you know what, I'm tired, I'm just going to take a rest. No, they had to keep going. As Harriet Tubman reminds us, we have to keep going, And so in that, in the spirit of that, the way that we keep going is having each other be our currency, as opposed to money, as opposed to capitalism, as opposed to what you can own. It is your relationships with your kin and outside of your kin that they give you an abundance of survival. There are people who exist right now without money, right? Because they share their resources from people who sew, to people who hunt, to people who do the cooking, people who do the teaching. And so that's why I say it's a vast amount of ways to engage in activism. The reason why I do it through dance is because that was my gateway. That was my gateway to myself, to the evolution of my gender, understanding myself. And so it is where I sit. It's how I started. I said, I'm a dancer. I'm a dancer first. All other things are because I've had to survive. I'm an activist because I wouldn't be alive at 36 if I wasn't. It is not lost on me that as a Afro-Indigenous trans woman, that I'm an elder at 36. That's a reality, which means that it's my job to be in front and to be out in public and to make myself seen and to interrupt spaces with my art, with my activism, with my body, whatever I can use and do. And so that's how I embody it for myself. And I hope that people find their own avenues into it, whether that be draw, whether you be good at media, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. If you use something that brings you joy and turn that into the way that you connect to activism, then you won't burn out. Then you can keep yourself safe because the work is continuous. So that's my offering.
Merci beaucoup, Raven. Je trouve ça vraiment inspirant de t'écouter. Je pense que c'est effectivement important de se rappeler les efforts de tous les gens qui sont venus avant nous puis qui nous permettent d'avoir un petit peu plus de safety dans le monde. J'ai l'impression que la perspective comme des personnes disabled est vraiment essentielle pour l'évolution des sociétés, puis j'espère sincèrement que les personnes able-bodied puis les personnes neurotypiques vont mettre davantage d'intérêt puis de compassion autour de nos vies puis de l'activisme qu'on développe tous ensemble. J'ai l'impression que les conventions sociales puis les normes sociales ne font que montrer une petite partie de ce qu'est l'expérience humaine. Puis c'est super important qu'on puisse montrer au monde quelle est notre perspective, parce que ça va juste enrichir la vie de tout le monde, en fait. Puis je pense que le futur, c'est ça. Le futur, c'est l'accessibilité, essentiellement.
Thank you, Kamisa. Thank you, Raven, for these very thoughtful answers. As for my thoughts on this is Arcelia speaking, past, present, future, I completely agree with what have already been said. Also, in terms of thinking, most of the things that are happening will take us more and more towards our engagements with the planet and the people's relationship to the land, and what Raven was giving the example of people doing picnicking and leaving heaps of garbage behind. So this has already been said by disability justice and environmental justice activists and indigenous people, that the entire disablement of the planet itself has already become the question of access now. What is happening to the planet, how it is becoming impaired, lands, waters, and airs. And the knowledge to deal with this current moment of crisis that the whole modern capitalist world is in lies in the existing forms of knowledge coming from indigenous communities, which is already widely has been said. And there is this modernist belief that more technology, more design, more solutions will solve the current climate catastrophe problems. And universities are highly complicit in that. And me, as an employee of the university, I work in an institutional environment, but there has to be, and there is, I am hopeful, room for holding space. I think that's a very key word that you said, Tracy. Holding space itself is a form of activism, making room, holding space for what isn't normally allowed to take space or just to exist. So how can we hold space for already existing knowledges about the land, already existing experiential knowledges about the relationship to the environment, and how can we bring that to inform us? How can we hold space for the existing disability survival skills, which are essential to the moment that the world itself has just found itself in? How can we mobilize those survival skills? I think these will be key questions for the future lying ahead, where the answers are actually lying all in the past. And in the history and looking back on what has already been produced as forms of knowledge and survival skills. So that's the end of my thoughts.
Thank you all. Yeah, I really love this conversation of thinking about using both the tools and knowledge that's been gifted to us and also dreaming bigger, more expansively together in the now, and how that just weaves together this future where we can be hopeful and free together. Avery, I'm going to hand the baton to you for a moment to relay to us the questions from the Q&A.
So we have yet to receive any questions in the Q&A. I would like to give this moment now to let people tuning in either in the webinar or in the swap card to have any questions either in the chat or in either of the Q&A boxes, whatever is more accessible for you. We can definitely continue with another question from Tracy if that is something that you have, Tracy. Do you? No?
Let me see here. I could definitely see what else was on our first conversation.
Because I think we might want to give the audience members a little more time. I don't know if anything will come in the next minute.
Yeah, one of the questions I would really love to hear from you all is whose work and whose lives uplift you and what you do, and in sort of in reciprocity, you doing that here with us today, uplifting and inspiring us with those people and their work and their practice. So whose work and whose lives uplift you and what you do?
Moi, je dirais que c'est d'abord mes amis qui me supportent le plus, qui m'inspirent énormément, qui me donnent de la force quand j'en ai plus, qui m'inspirent encore et encore et encore, puis qui m'apprennent aussi, qui peuvent m'éduquer sur d'autres disabilities que je n'ai pas, en fait. Ça, je pense que c'est une grande richesse que j'ai la chance d'avoir comme dans mon petit cercle. Sinon, je dirais qu'il y a une artiste en particulier que j'apprécie vraiment beaucoup qui s'appelle Jillian Mercado. J'aime vraiment beaucoup son travail, je la trouve vraiment inspirante, puis je vous encourage à la suivre sur les réseaux sociaux. Voilà.
Merci, Kamisa.
I can jump in. I am constantly inspired. You know, you have to sort of be a sponge in a way. You know what I mean? It just allows you to just soak in all the different ways that people are incredible. I'm you know, I have been inspired by everyone from Nina Simone to Janet Jackson to Dainty Smith to Dorothy Dandridge, you know, to Shaka Khan, to Eartha Kitt, to the Black Panthers, to the people who I'm in community with. You know, there's always this sort of need to find one charismatic leader. But for me, it's like it's actually looking all the way across and all the ways people are living inside their lives. And so I'm inspired by people who I mentor as well. Sonia Renee Taylor, who authored Your Body Is Not an Apology, is an incredible thought leader who I am learning from currently. Amanda Seals, who is a comedian and social activist, who I'm also learning from. Angela Rye, who's a political commentator. These are all Black women who are powerful and articulate their messages in vastly different ways. To like Little Kim and Missy Elliott, like I love all the ways that people are change the perception about what is possible. That's what I'm interested in. Possibility models. Jackie Shane specifically for me as a trans rock and roll artist, you know, in the 60s, whose representation is the most similar to mine that I've ever seen in media. And so these things are very important. So that's for me.
Arcely, are you interested in talking to this one?
At this moment, I can't really think of any names. My mind more, unfortunately, goes towards scholarly work as a disadvantage of my job.
Give it to
So,
us. Come on.
I can more speak of, I guess, who I'm affected by the writings of Alison Kafer, that I really, really deeply respect her work. Jasper Poir, who I learn a lot from in terms of her writing. Yosa Esteban Munoz has been a key person as well in terms of how I think about performance. So these are the names that comes to my head right away. But as I said, I'm going more towards academic work, unfortunately.
It's wonderful.
I think that's okay. You know, like Kimberly Crenshaw, who's an incredible academic, who coined intersectionality, has shifted so many of the ways we are having these conversations. You know, Dr. Cyrus Marcus Ware, who's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter Canada with me, has written so many books on disability justice and art practice as abolition and ways of understanding to creating banners, you know, and banners being a way of building community and trust. And so there's a lot to receive from both academics and non. And yeah, just wanted to offer that too.
Thank you all for that. Avery, I wonder if there are questions, and if not, I'm ready to thank everybody here.
Out of all of the 50 people who are tuning in with us between the two platforms, we do not have any questions. It's a shy bunch or a speechless bunch due to all the amazing things you have to say. But either way, no, there are no questions. So definitely some thank yous are in order, I believe.
Yes, okay. Well, it's been beautiful to be here with you all, audience, and with this incredible panel, Raven, Arcely, and Kamisa. Thank you so much. It's beautiful to be building in creative and new ways and old ways of being and relating. I want to thank the three of you again and again. Avery Burrow, Lily Crissaldian, Kanita Neck, and the entire team at Dawn. Thank you so much for this. I want to thank the Access Support Team, the CART providers, the ASL and LSQ interpreters. I want to thank Geneviève for impromptu French to English translation, for jumping in there. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience. And again, thanks to everybody for allowing us to share in this with you today.
Can I just jump in and ask Raven a question?
Of course, yes.
I'm really super interested in the work you did. You mentioned with a disabled participant in your dance group, and you're working towards developing fascinating best practices. So I'm interested in that process of how you created that. How did the experience of having a disabled dancer in the room affected your creative working process? I'm really interested in what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it came out of by chance, really. I went to the School of Toronto Dance Theatre, and so I have the privilege of being able-bodied, and so you know, I was in my community realizing that so many people didn't have access to this information, who wanted access to it. And so my partner and my best friend and I started our dance company together for fun. It was a way to just express and to see ourselves in a way that we weren't allowed to in the mainstream dance space, which is largely thought of as open, but it's really not, actually. And so we really carved a new space for ourselves, and this was in 2007. And so we were asked to go and teach for the University of Toronto's Women in Trans Center. And there was a moment where a participant said, I can't tell my left from my right. And I was like, oh, that's okay. And she cried because she had never been in a space that allowed that to be okay. And then asked us, are there any other classes that are being taught in this city like this? And we couldn't answer that question because we couldn't find any. So then we started teaching those classes and learned very quickly that there were so many things that we didn't know. And so we really learned while we were facilitating how to do so in a way that was not further perpetuating like body hierarchy, like even the way that our language of how we were taught dance has ableism in it. And so having to unwork that, and then working with Kumari Giles, who's an incredible artist, who also has an invisible disability, and so for us it was like, oh my goodness, like let's talk about how we can expand this. And it was really them who challenged us to do things in a really different way and really open up even the way that we presented to the world. It was really great. And so with the Trillium Foundation, we have this grant. It's a 3-year grant. And so the first year was teaching the intensive, which is a 2-month intensive where we teach folks how to create their own solos. But we also mentor them in like ballet and jazz and all the techniques that we have, so that they can have self-agency in how they tell their own stories. And then, so that was the first year. And so we took that, we documented that experience. The second year, we started connecting to facilitators who were also teaching in these ways, to help infuse for our program what it could look like. And this is our last year. And so this year we're doing consultations with those facilitators in a meeting. So they're all in conversation with each other, to see what comes out of that exploration. And then we're building this toolkit manual, which will be online and published, so that it reaches different people and avenues, and continues the work of accessibility. Yeah.
Thank you, Raven. That's fascinating. I would love to look into the outcomes of the project and the booklets. It sounds fascinating.
Thank you so much, Raven. That was amazing. We have one final question from the audience, and 5 minutes left in this discussion. So I would, if that's all right with everybody, we can end this panel on this final discussion, and hopefully maybe 1 or 2 of you can speak to it. So Elodie has written in the chat, I do have a question about the way everyday life of disabled people's micro actions can be seen as protest and resistance. Is it seen as a way of protesting and resisting from our disabled, mad, and deaf points of view? How can it be seen by able-bodied people as a way of resisting and protesting? The it is just living an everyday life.
Je dirais que pour ma part, me dévoiler dans la vie de tous les jours pourrait s'intégrer là-dedans, dans le sens où souvent j'informe les gens qui ne me percevaient pas comme quelqu'un de disabled. Je les informe de mes disabilities quand je vais mettre des limites, par exemple. J'ai souvent des moments de sensory overload, je ne sais pas comment on dit ça en français. Puis j'ai souvent dû informer mes proches de ça, ou des collègues de travail, etc. Puis j'ai l'impression que ça peut susciter... ça peut aller chercher leur sensibilité, puis ça peut créer des moments de sensibilisation à ma condition, simplement par le fait de le nommer puis de devoir établir des limites pour assurer mon bien-être puis ma sécurité. Fait que je pense que ce sont des petits gestes qui au final, à force que le temps passe, ce sont des gestes qui peuvent devenir, prendre de l'ampleur, puis devenir beaucoup plus significatifs. Puis je pense que ça peut entrer dans une dynamique de protest ou une dynamique politique au final.
Thank you to everybody for this panel. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to again say a huge thank you to everybody who has tuned into this panel, and I would love to invite everybody to check out the rest of the things that Dawn is doing for National Accessibility Week this week. We have a spoken word workshop in 2 parts, spoken word for social justice as well as spoken word for connecting with one's personal desires and needs. And we have an artist talk and film screening with Laurence Parent, and we're ending the week off with an incredible artistic showcase featuring a lot of very amazing disabled artists. So I wanted to again say thank you to Tracy and to the incredible panelists for this really, really fruitful discussion, as well as to our powerhouse ASL, LSQ, French to English interpreters, and our CART captioners. It is such an honor for me to be doing this work and to be bringing panels together that are accessible to people in both of the official Canadian languages as well as in LSQ and ASL. And I hope to one day be able to bring these panels in Indigenous languages as well. I wish everybody an amazing National Accessibility Week and a fantastic rest of your day. I will pass it on to Tracy to just end us off, but it is a real pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Avery. I've done my thanks. So thanks again, everyone. Kamisa, Arceli, Raven, what a pleasure, what an honor. Thank you, everyone, for being here.